No One is Self-Made. Build Your Village to Flourish in Business and Life by Dr. Lakesha Hallmon. So today I'm going to be reviewing this book, focusing on the first two chapters of No One is Self-Made with an emphasis on community, intuition, and alignment. So I met Dr. Lakesha Hallmon when I was attending the Hospitality Huge Summit in New Orleans a few weeks ago. And we got her book, and I'm reading the book, and I'm loving the book. I've only read the first two chapters so far, so that's what I'm focusing on for my review so far. There are 8 chapters, so I might do 4 separate reviews, focusing on 2 chapters at a time. But I want to go ahead and get into these first 2 chapters. So I'm Dr. Kathryn Sophia Belle. I did all the things that Black women are told we're supposed to do. I got all the degrees. I was married. I had 4 kids. I had the successful career. I had it all, and I felt trapped by all of it. And so I liberated myself. And after a 20-year successful career in academia, I resigned/retired and focused on entrepreneurship in pursuit of my other dreams. So I am founder of Belle Vie Academy. On the business side of that, or on the professional side of that, I support Black women writers and professors who are navigating getting tenure and promotion and writing their books and things like that. People who are in the academy, I help them figure out how to navigate the academy because I did it successfully. People who want to get out of the academy, I help them figure out how to exit strategically, right? So that's the work that I'm doing already as founder of Belle Vie Academy. And then also on the interpersonal side, I support Black women who want to be happily unmarried, delightfully divorced, and erotically empowered. And a lot of that, of course, is drawing on my own lived experience and expertise in academia and in life, right? And one of my latest ventures is Belle's Bed and Breakfast Boutique Hotel. So I'm launching from Philosopher to Hotelier. And I see that launch as an extension of what I'm already doing with Belle Vie Academy. And a lot of that work that I currently do is virtually, but having a space, Belle's Bed and Breakfast/Boutique Hotels, provides a physical gathering space for the beloved community that I'm building virtually, right? And part of how I'm also building that beloved community virtually is through this YouTube channel. So thank you for watching the YouTube channel. If you're new here, welcome. If you already subscribed, welcome back. Thank you for being a subscriber. If you're not subscribed, I invite you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. So let's get into this. What I'm going to talk about in this video is I do want to talk about a recent interview with Dr. Lakesha Hallmon on The Breakfast Club. Again, I'm going to focus on chapters 1 and 2 of No One is Self-Made. And then I'm also going to weave in some of my own experiences of how I've been able to connect to and build community with intention in my own personal and professional life, as well as how I've paid attention to alignment and misalignment, as well as intuition, in ways that have informed my own life choices, right? And the reason I'm focusing on those things is because those are some of the themes that come up in these first 2 chapters of No One is Self-Made. Okay, so again, I got the opportunity to meet Dr. Lakesha Hallmon in person at Hospitality Huge. She is that girl. She is that person. Her energy was amazing. She just really inspired and motivated and transformed the space in the room when she was in it. So I really enjoyed her a lot. And the interviews that I've seen with her has been similar energy as what I experienced in person at the Hospitality Huge Summit. So shout out to Ashley Johnson, founder of Hospitality Huge, for having Dr. Lakesha Hallmon there. So for those of you who may not have met her before or heard about her before, I would recommend that you watch, and I'm sure there are other interviews, but this is one that I found. Dr. Lakesha Hallmon Talks No One is Self-Made, Divine Alignment, State of the People Power Tour on the channel Breakfast Club Power 105.1 FM. I will link to that interview in this video, right? So let me just get into some of the themes that come out of that interview. And again, those themes overlap with the themes in these first 2 chapters that I'm going to focus on in my review here. And again, I'm going to go back and forth a bit between some quotes from the book and what she talks about in the book, and some of my own life experience with some of these things. So in the interview, she talks about the importance of getting into alignment with your purpose. She talks about how alignment is not forced, how alignment is divine. You can be your authentic self and be supported as who you are instead of like having this aside and trying to be someone else. She gives the example of her getting this special education exam, or taking this special education exam to get certified because one of her mentors encouraged her to do that, even though at the time she was teaching honor students and AP students. One of her mentors encouraged her to get this certification in special education, and so she went ahead and did it, and it's something that ended up helping her later, even though, so this is when she was a teacher in Mississippi. She was teaching honors and AP courses. She wanted to go to Atlanta. One of her mentors in Mississippi encouraged her to take this special education certification. So she takes the certification, not really thinking about it, not even preparing for it. And when an opportunity comes up in Atlanta, she does well on the interview. They want to hire her, but someone more senior than her wants the position, so they can't offer it to her because the more senior person has seniority. And the principal in Atlanta says, well, if you had a special education certification, then I would be able to offer you something there. And she happened to have this special education certification because she listened to this mentor in Mississippi, and that's how she gets to Atlanta. So that's just an example of her like listening to her mentors and trusting her intuition, or just trusting the people that were put in her path, and those things that she did out of kind of obedience or just understanding the assignment worked out for her later on. So I love that story. And then she also talks about the shift from education to entrepreneurship and the transferable skills of that. And that is something that I actually explicitly asked her about at Hospitality Hued, because again, going off of my own experience, I have these 20 years of experience and expertise in academia, and I have also often emphasized that those are highly valuable and transferable skills. The fact that I've left academia and decided to go full-time into entrepreneurship doesn't mean I'm starting from scratch or starting from zero or starting from nothing. I'm building on that 20 years of experience and expertise. So I asked her to talk about that a little bit at Hospitality Hued, and she elaborated on it. And it also comes through in the book, No One is Self-Made. And it also comes out in this interview that she has that I will link to. She also talks about the importance of saying no and using discernment, maturity, and having an abundance mindset when you say no. And this I also want to connect to academics. So she talks about saying no to things that are not in alignment or that are not the right timing. And she gives the example of sometimes we say yes to things because there's a scarcity mentality that if we say no, another opportunity might not come along. And this does happen with academics a lot, especially junior faculty will be asked to do a lot of things, and then they don't need to be saying yes to all of those things, because especially if you're on the tenure track, you have so much time. In order to get tenure, you need to focus on your publications and things like that. And sometimes junior faculty are afraid of saying no to things because they think the invitations will stop. But it's important to, again, have this discernment about what do you say yes to that feels aligned with your vision, your purpose, your tenure track goals, whatever that may be, and how to say no to things that are not aligned or that the timing is not right because you need to focus on other priorities. So I like that connection there. She talks about trusting the divine, trusting intuition. Again, this is something that I will bring back up because I do live a very intuitive life, and I emphasize alignment a lot in my own life. And she talks about how this requires stillness, quieting the noises and distractions from our own divine selves, and just having moderation in all things. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. But again, she gets into that in the book as well. She talks about being attuned to oneself, trusting your gut, paying attention to how you feel. And this is something else that I emphasize a lot, usually with reference to Audre Lorde, who talks about the importance of our feelings being sources of information, right? So I describe it as emotional epistemology as well as embodied epistemology, right? Like our bodies, how we feel in our bodies gives us important information and knowledge, and emotions, how we feel emotionally, gives us important information if we pay attention to it and if we're attuned to it. So I come at it at from a slightly different perspective and through different kind of intellectual and literary figures, but I agree with what she's saying here. She also talks about the importance of being consistent, especially in showing up for yourself and as yourself. She talks about support being a verb or an action item and the importance of aligned action. And she talks about how burnout is real even when you are in alignment, and so you have to be really intentional about delegating more and letting go of control of things in order to not be burned out. And then she talks about the importance of collective and social impact. So those are some of the highlights of the interview, but again, those highlights and themes also come through in these first two chapters of No One is Self-Made. Okay, so let's get into the book itself now. And again, I'm going to try to go back and forth between her highlights and some of the quotes from the book and some of my own experience related to these. This book resonated with me a lot, especially the second chapter on alignment, again, because I talk about alignment so much and misalignment so much. And so let's get into it. Okay, so the first chapter is titled The Myth of Self-Made. And so she basically debunks this idea that anybody is self-made, right? Her argument is no one, the title of the book, no one is self-made. Whomever is out there that's experiencing success, there's been some forms of support that they've gotten over the years. So she says, but it's not real, this notion of being self-made. The reality is that everyone receives some form of help, and that support comes in many forms: financial, emotional, mentorship, social. Of all the successful entrepreneurs I know and have read about, self-made isn't an accurate description for any of them. Everyone, no matter how seemingly independent and no matter how brilliant and hardworking, is a product of their village in some way. Success is built on community and collective efforts. But the myth of going at it alone has saturated our culture, which is why when someone describes me as self-made, I kindly redirect them. Thank you, but I'm village made. So again, this is the title of the book, the main thesis of the book that she gets into. So that's in chapter 1. Also in chapter 1, she talks about alignment, even though alignment is a heavy theme in chapter 2 as well, but she's already hinting at it at chapter 1. So in chapter 1, so this is on page 21 now, she says, every step forward confirmed to me that this communal way of building was it, right? And she's talking about building the Village Market in Atlanta, Georgia. The communal way of building was it. Things started falling into place, aligning in ways I couldn't have predicted. I experienced a feeling of purpose, a sense that I was fulfilling a role and a cause that took on a life of its own. It felt like a spiritual download that was very much ancestral. Deep in my being, I understood the connection between what I was creating and what had been built upon by those who came before me. So I love this emphasis on, she talks a lot about faith. She talks a lot about obviously community in the village, and she talks a lot about ancestors. And one of the things that she did at the Hospitality Huge Summit that I appreciated was just naming her maternal ancestral lineage, right? Like, I am the daughter of, and I am the granddaughter of, and I am the great granddaughter of. And my sister and I do this oftentimes. We'll say, like, we are the daughters of Kathleen Smallwood and the granddaughter of the woman we call the original Kathryn Belle, because my chosen name, my first name was always Kathryn after my maternal grandmother, but my chosen name of Kathryn Sophia Belle is to honor my maternal grandmother, whose name was Kathryn Belle, Bell. I just added the extra E for a little self-differentiation, but it still sounds the same, and for the meaning of beauty or good. So when I named my business Belle Vie Academy, it literally means the good life or the beautiful life, right? But that name comes from my maternal grandmother, the original Kathryn Belle. And we're the great granddaughters of Serena Smallwood, right? So I love that she names her parents and her grandparents, and that she names ancestors here. So shout out to that. Let's see what else we have in chapter 1. Let's see. Okay, so she says, this is where she gets into like shifting our mentality from a scarcity mentality to a more abundant mentality, and not getting caught up in capitalism and rebuilding the very same things that we're trying to get away from. And so she says it's important to remember that there is enough for all of us. And then she goes on to say, this is on page 33, we need visionaries and builders who are building differently, more inclusively. We need leaders who center the community with every step. So again, the idea is like, if we are feeling oppressed or repressed or suppressed or whatever the case may be in these capitalist systems, in whatever career or enterprise or industry that we're in, and we decide to go out and build our own thing, it's important not to rebuild and duplicate the very thing that you just got pushed out of or walked away from. Like, how do you build something differently, more sustainably? And for me, I've also thought about this in terms of just the exploitation of labor, right? And so in certain ways, if I felt like my labor was exploited and extracted and simultaneously devalued in academia in certain kind of ways, what I'm not going to do is replicate that as I'm building my own businesses and teams and communities. But I'm also not going to replicate a kind of hustle and grind culture that comes with a capitalist system when I'm building my own thing. So how do you not, it takes a certain level of courage and all kinds of other things to walk away from a thing that's not working for you. But I think it also requires a certain level of self-awareness and intention to not rebuild the very thing that you walked away from. So I appreciate this point also in chapter 1. Okay. So I think that is most of what we have from chapter 1. Some of the points about community that I was going to highlight from my own lived experience, and this really goes back to childhood and even going back to, again, my matrilineal line, right? And so I really learned about community for the most part in my childhood from my mother, because she was very connected to community. She was very committed to community, right? So I grew up for the most part in Montclair, New Jersey, where a lot of our community was at the public library, right? And so there were people at the public library that knew us, that loved us, that cared for us as an extension of my mother's village and raising my sister and I after she got divorced as a single mother, right? So I learned about and saw community personally in Montclair, New Jersey, again, especially at the public library, but not exclusively there. Also in the church communities that my mother was a part of, whether she was a member of the church, she eventually became an evangelist, a minister, and then eventually in later years became a pastor. But I did get a strong sense of community in the church growing up, in community with my mother. And she's someone that was always involved in the community. I mean, in Montclair, she worked at Montclair High School for a long time. Once she went and got her master's in education and went to law school, she was a public defender for a while before she switched into education law. And she always worked in public school districts, right? And so when she was working in the Jersey City School District, which at the time had been taken over by the state because it was in such disarray, she put my sister and I in school in the Jersey City public school system because she felt like if she was going to be working there, then she needed her children in that district, right? And then when she went to Trenton Public School District, I went to Trenton Central High School, which was a public school there. Trenton at the time was like the third worst school district in the state of New Jersey. But again, she felt like if she was working there, then I should be in the school there. I finished in 3 years at the age of 16. I got in and got out. I got what I needed from it. But she was also very involved in community in Trenton, from ministerial work to working for the Trenton Public Schools to working for Doug Palmer, who was the first Black mayor of Trenton. She became his chief of staff there. She was involved in the Urban League. She was involved with the Deltas. So she was involved with the NAACP. I think she was the president of the NAACP at one point. So I watched my mother always being very much involved in community, and my sister and I went with her many places that she went. So we went with her to work many times. We went with her to many community meetings many times. So I just grew up with that sense of connection to community modeled for me in a particular kind of way. And I was very intentional in how I built community in my own kind of educational experience and professional experience. So for example, when I was a graduate student at the University of Memphis, I founded the Ida B. Wells Philosophical Forum there, which was meant to help support undergraduate students, Black undergraduate student majors in philosophy, to help them see a kind of path into graduate school in philosophy, because there weren't that many, there still aren't that many Black philosophers. When I went to graduate school, there were only 16 Black women philosophers, or Black women with PhDs in philosophy in the United States. Now there are about 50. So I founded the Ida B. Wells Philosophical Forum as a graduate student, and the Ida B. Wells Conference is something that still happens even now, 25 or so years post me being in graduate school, right? Then when I was a junior faculty member, I founded the Collegium of Black Women Philosophers for those of us who are in philosophy, and I initially envisioned that for faculty, but once I created the website for it, I think I was thinking faculty and graduate students. But then once the website went up, I started getting emails from undergraduate students who were saying, like, I'm the only Black woman philosophy major at my school. I'm dealing with racism and sexism. I didn't think there was a path for me to do philosophy, but now that I see this organization exists, I can see a path forward, right? And so that was something that I created as a junior faculty member at Vanderbilt. When I left from Vanderbilt and went to Penn State, I moved Collegium of Black Women Philosophers with me there. Since I've resigned/retired from Penn State, I've withdrawn it from there, but I'm in conversation with some other Black women philosophers about where that will go next. But that was a way for me to build community with other Black women philosophers, to support those of us who were there, but also to mentor and support those junior faculty members. So it was basically an organization created across ranks. Like, how can we support the undergraduates who want to go to graduate school? How can we support the graduate students who want to go into tenure track positions? And then how can we support across the ranks from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor, right? But that was a very intentional building of community that I did as a junior faculty member. And I started that at Vanderbilt and then went to Penn State. And then even at Penn State, I co-founded, and this was still as a junior faculty member before I got tenure, I co-founded Sisters in Writing with some other junior faculty members. We were all Black women in the academy, pre-tenure, and we basically like worked out together. We trained for 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons together, and we wrote our books together, and we all got tenure, right? And so that was something that we co-created as junior faculty members, Sisters in Writing. And of course that also became a kind of inspiration for what I later did with Belle Vie Writers. Also, when I was a junior faculty member, I was a co-founder of the journal Critical Philosophy of Race, because we were producing all of these students who were specializing in critical philosophy of race, and so we needed a journal where they could actually publish their scholarship, right? And so that was also about community building for philosophers who were doing work in critical philosophy of race. So all of that to say, like, community has always been very central for me. And obviously, once I decided to resign/retire from the academia, I had already been doing coaching and work like that for over 10 years, since about 2011. I resigned/retired in 2023. And so I had a coaching business where I was offering coaching and workshops and things like that, once I changed my name to Kathryn Belle, I changed the name of my business to Belle Vie Academy, with one of the signature programs being Belle Vie Writers. And that, again, is a very community-centered effort to, again, as I said earlier, support Black women scholars and professors and writers who are in academia and navigate being in it or navigate getting out of it, but also supporting Black women writers, some of whom who are in the academy, some of whom are independent writers and independent scholars. So that's a long way of saying yes to community. I'm glad that she emphasizes community, and it's something that has been central for me, both when I was in the academy and now that I'm no longer in the academy and doing entrepreneurship through Belle Vie Academy, and when I'm building next, Belle's Bed and Breakfast and Boutique Hotels. Okay, so now let's switch gears to chapter 2. So some of her highlights, and again, listen, y'all, I have all the little Post-its in here because there are a lot of great quotes in here and a lot of great points that she makes. Okay, so let's start with, let's see. Oh, this is, and I actually didn't even tag this. I just happened to turn to this page. But if you guys, for people who are in Belle Vie writers, when we do our check-ins, I often end by saying, like, obviously we're fabulous and amazing because we are doing great things, and I affirm all of the things that they checked in about in terms of the progress they're making. But I also often say that I'm the goddess of good life choices. And I often say, like, one of my mantras is, I am exactly where I need to be. I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I need to be doing. And so she has a quote in here that reminds me of that mantra. So this is on page 41. And so she says, people who are like-minded seem to appear. So she's like, once you get to a place of alignment, then the people who you need in your life come to your life to kind of support your vision. And so she says, people who are like-minded seem to appear in your life at the right moments and give you determination to keep pursuing the vision you see in your mind. Purpose puts a clear path before you, and you feel unstoppable. You see the return on your investment of time. You see the result you feel accomplished. And then this is the part that reminds me of my mantra. She says, you sense that you are where you are meant to be, doing what you are meant to do. So I literally always say, like, I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I need to be doing. So that quote definitely resonated with me. So she says, so now she's starting to talk about this transition again, because she starts in education. She's a teacher in Mississippi. Then she moves to Atlanta. She becomes a teacher in Atlanta. she applies for, or she's asked to help support a group. They're applying for a grant for some funding for an after school program at the school she works at in Atlanta. And so she's asked to help, and so she helps them with this grant. They win the grant. She ends up being like the assistant director for the grant, and then the director for the grant, I think. And then she ends up switching from the high school, going over to the Georgia Department of Education. And she talks about how she always felt this passion for education. She always felt called for education, but eventually that the calling, the sense of purpose shifts for her. And so she says, I began to feel out of place and isolated. My soul was no longer at home there. I felt that my purpose was to teach, but not at Palmer. So I think this is actually when she's making the transition from Mississippi to Atlanta. And then she talks about a lot about alignment. So she says, I think of these new chapters in life as assignments, right? Again, shifting from Mississippi going to Atlanta. And so she says, I believe we're fulfilling our assignments. We're saying yes to new opportunities. There's a feeling of alignment as if it's being orchestrated for our good. And she also gives the example of this is how she got a literary agent for this very book that she published. So she'd agreed to be on somebody's podcast. The literary agent heard her on the podcast and then reached out to her and helped her get this book out into the world. Okay, so that's an earlier example of alignment, but hold on, let me find the later example that she gives, because the later example I'm thinking about is when she leaves the Department of Education to go into entrepreneurship full time. So she says, okay, this is on pages 46 and 47. So she says, you feel confident in the work you're doing and it feels true to your values. So she's talking about what alignment feels like. So let's see. Okay, so she says, so again, she gets this grant. She goes to work for the Georgia Department of Education. She says, when you say yes to assignments, you give your all. When your community needs you, you fall into alignment and you grow. I showed up fully in each moment of opportunity. And then that's when she says, you feel confident in the work you're doing and it feels true to your values, right? And so she's talking about like, this is what the alignment looked like for her in Mississippi, and then in Atlanta, in the school, and then at the Georgia Department of Education. And again, this was similar for me in terms of my experience of alignment, going from like finishing high school in 3 years and then going to Spelman College and changing from biology pre-med pre-law major to philosophy, and then deciding to pursue my PhD in philosophy and being accepted directly into a PhD program in philosophy, earning my master's and PhD in 4 years, going into a postdoc at Emory, and then a tenure track job at Vanderbilt, and then a tenure track job at Penn State University, right? Like, so all of those things aligned really well for me along the way. I often say I was in the academy for 20 years. The first 10 years I really enjoyed. The last 10 years I knew I was going to be exiting out, like 10 years, and I knew that wasn't what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life, but it took me 10 years to kind of get things lined up in order to be able to walk away. So again, a lot of what she's sharing in terms of her version of this for her own life resonated with me, or I was able to make connections with versions of this that I had in my own life. So she says, by 2018, this is like, so she's like, everything lined up. I felt like I was on divine assignment. I felt like I was fulfilling my purpose. And she says, and yet in 2018, after having spent 6 years at the Georgia Department of Education, something had decidedly shifted. I was feeling drawn to pour my all into the village market, which I've been doing since 2016. My side passion project seeped into every free moment I had during the day and consumed my mornings and late nights. I began to envision my life outside of education, but I was afraid. I'd never been a full-time business owner. I'd never even taken a business class, right? So I appreciate her naming, like, I really love this profession that I had. I love being an educator, and then I love continuing to work in education at the Georgia Department of Education. But at a certain point, something shifted, and that was no longer my call. And again, that was my experience. Now, she had this shift much quicker than me, from 2016 to 2018. For me, that shift was like from 2013 to 2023. It was like I knew that this was not the thing that I was going to be doing. There were some things I needed to finish up, but also some cash that I needed to stack, and some other decisions. Well, and then also I got divorced in those 10 years. I got happily unmarried and delightfully divorced. So I knew I had a sense in 2013, 2014 that I needed to exit the marriage as well as academia. I didn't feel like I could do both at the same time. So I exited the marriage first, and then I exited academia. Okay, so she says, this is on page 47 at the top of the page. She says, we can have more than one purpose, and the gifts and skills we hone along one purposeful path can be used to chart other routes, to shape other creations. If we trust our heartstrings and answer the needs of our community, new purposes can be revealed to us. However, this transition can feel disorienting. This is very true. While I was falling deeply in love with Village Market, I felt unsettled and off-center. I was experiencing a sort of misalignment in my role with the Georgia Department of Education, right? So it's like, okay, she'd had this role, she'd been happy in it, and again, something shifted, and she felt more called to focus her energies and efforts on the Village Market. So going a little further down on page 47 again. So she says, when you're out of alignment, things aren't smooth. Most interactions feel forced and depleting. You go about it like a Ferris wheel, slowly in a circle, arriving at the same direction. For some, this may feel like a grave detachment, which I talk about more in chapter 6. She says, when we are out of alignment, it takes from us, from our energy, our spirit, our creativity, and never pours back into us. It steals passion and erodes our beliefs in ourselves. Our inner knowing is telling us that we are meant for more than this state of unease, but we feel stuck and lost. The things that normally make us come alive, work trips, special projects, connecting with coworkers, don't do it for us anymore. We all have down moments, even when we're in alignment, but the lackluster moments accumulate. But when the lackluster moments accumulate, they can turn into lackluster days and then weeks, creating a state of lethargy. When you are in a relationship that is long overdue to end, but you stay, be it a professional relationship, romantic, or with a friend, the relationship brings out the worst in you and gnaws at your self-esteem and peace. Listen, there is so much in here, and I literally just mentioned, getting happily unmarried and delightfully divorced before leaving academia. And for me, that was true for both things, both for the marriage relationship as well as for me and my time as a professor. I knew that my time, it was time to move on. It was time to shift. So I stayed in that marriage for 17 years before I was able to extract myself from the marriage. I stayed in academia for 20 years before I was able to extract myself from academia. But this description of misalignment is very true. Like for me, and I often say, like, of course, there are plenty of things we can complain about marriage, about the particular person that you're married to. There are plenty of things we can complain about academia or the particular institution or department you're in. But for me, my decision to exit both marriage and academia came down to alignment versus misalignment. Like, I felt misaligned in marriage, period, not just the person I was married to. I felt misaligned in academia, period, not just the particular institution where I was working. And once I recognized that misalignment, I knew that I needed to shift to get back in alignment. And that shift in getting back in alignment required no longer being in the relationship with the person I was married to, or no longer being at the institution or in academia, period, for me, right? And so for me, misalignment felt like, again, I'd had a lot of ease in academia in terms of like the work that I was doing, the getting different positions, right? Like I didn't have a hard time getting jobs or keeping jobs or moving jobs. I didn't have a hard time publishing. I didn't have a hard time getting the resources and support for the initiatives that I was starting, right? That was all very easeful. But at a certain point, things stopped feeling easeful. And it was very noticeable for me. So like, again, for me, it was like insomnia. I was starting to experience insomnia. It was weight gain. I ended up gaining a lot of weight. It was migraines. I started having a lot of migraine headaches. It was tension in like my neck and my shoulders. It was tension in my lower back. So even though mentally, or I would not really say to myself, I'm feeling stressed. Like that's not a thought that would come to me. But physiologically, I was holding a lot of stress in my body. It's like my body was like, girl, we stressed. Like you might not think you're stressed, but like let me show you and let me tell you how stressed we are and how stressful the situation is and how out of alignment it is. Also, I realized like on the marriage side of things, if I had given a whole list of like, okay, you need to do these 10 things in order for me to be happy, even with those 10 things being done, I still wasn't happy, right? Like, because again, it wasn't about the person or what the person was doing or not doing, even though there's plenty of complaints that could be made about that. It was really like marriage was not something that was in alignment for me. It was very marriage period, and then marriage to that particular person in particular was misaligned for me. And then the same with academia. There were plenty of things that were going very well. I negotiated well for myself. There were all kinds of things that were going well. But at a certain point, it just was not aligned for me anymore. And what else I noticed is like right at the end, for the most part, everything that I ever asked for in academia, whether it was a raise, whether it was promotion, whether it was research funds, funding for institutions that I was creating or initiatives that I was doing, I generally always got a yes for everything that I asked for. And right at the end, I started getting no's. And I think that was also part of a way of helping me extract myself, right? Because it's like when you're getting a yes to everything you asked for, it can be harder to walk away from the thing because it's like, okay, well, everything I asked for, I'm getting. All my needs are being met. But at a certain point when I was not getting what I was asking for, then it made it easier also to walk away from it. So yeah, the misalignment is real. And I was actually just in Belle Vie Writers. We do our writing in the morning from 9 to 11 Eastern time. And then I do like a group coaching session with them. That's optional from like 11 to 11:30. So a lot of times people will stay on for the group coaching to just check in and talk about things that are going on. And last week we had a group coaching session where I was sharing the story of like how I knew I was just so ready to go in that last year. So my last official date was June 30th, 2023. I think the last time that I taught was in fall of 2022. I was only teaching one course. It was a graduate seminar on Audre Lorde. In general, I like the graduate students. We had great graduate students. I love Audre Lorde. I'm literally writing a book on Audre Lorde now. So it wasn't about the students. It wasn't about the content of the course. It was just, I knew I didn't want to do this thing anymore. The class was only 1 day a week, 3 hours, 1 3-hour seminar. And every week I felt like I had to drag myself to campus. I would park the car right by the building where I was teaching. And every single week I had to like have a pep talk with myself. Like, okay, you're already here. Are you going to go in? Are you going to teach the class? Or are we going to cancel class and go home? Right? Like it was like that much of a struggle because it just, again, it was misaligned and it wasn't about the students. It wasn't about the course content. The students were great. The course was great. Audre Lorde is great. It was just, that was the end of my time there. And it was like, it was not easeful. It was very misaligned. So when she describes these things that come up when things are misaligned, like I really, again, this resonated with me a lot. Okay, so now let's talk about this transition that she has, right? Because I also had a similar transition for myself. So she gives the example. So she says, this is work. So this is when she's still at the Georgia Department of Education. So she says, this is where I found myself stretched too thin and unable to fully connect with my work anymore. It finally reached a crisis point when I said no to helping a supervisor on a project that was not related to my department or my responsibilities, in part because past experience had taught me that I'd end up doing all the work, but also because I subconsciously knew that refusing her would create a situation that would force me to leave. Predictably, I was officially called out for insubordination. My managers were compelled to say, Dr. Hallmon, this is not working. And I resolutely agreed. It definitely wasn't working. And that was my last day. Okay, I love this story so much because I get this too. Like I remember, so there were a couple of decisions that I made leading up to me, ultimately resigning. One was I was coming up for a sabbatical. So I was due a sabbatical, which basically would have meant I got either a full semester paid leave or a full year at like half pay. And I decided not to apply for the sabbatical because I knew if I had taken a sabbatical year, then I would owe the University of Year, and I knew I was not coming back after a year of being away. So I decided not to apply for the sabbatical. I also had negotiated for a semester of administrative leave that didn't really have any strings attached. So I was planning on taking that at a certain point. But like by January of 2023, I did the thing that was the subconscious thing. I sent out an email to graduate students that basically said, whatever you need from me, like you need to get it by June because I'm going to be on leave and I'm not going to be available. And that triggered like a bunch of like whatever that led to an email exchange that led to me ultimately being like, you know what? I'm not even staying long enough to take this administrative leave, right? And so the way that I often describe it is like my ancestors, because I have been negotiating still with myself and with the ancestors, like, well, I still could do the sabbatical. And it was like, no, I can't do the sabbatical because I can't come back for a year. And then it was like, well, I did still negotiate for this administrative leave. And the way I describe it is like my ancestors said, not only get out, but get out now. Like, not after the sabbatical, not after one more administrative leave. Like, you need to get out of the situation now. And so I appreciate this idea of this or this discussion of subconsciously knowing that, refusing to do this thing or declining to do this thing was going to have this kind of ripple effect. I knew that some of the emails that I sent were going to have the ripple effect that they were going to have. And ultimately it put me in a position to say, okay, I'm walking away free and clear, right? And part of the email exchange actually had to do with I was on several different dissertation committees, both as director and co-director, as well as just a member of dissertation committees. And the students, we were just coming off of COVID. Like, there was a lot of stuff that was going on with the students. And so I reached out and I said, listen, like, this is what I offer. What I offered was to take my administrative leave. And then I was like, I will stay on for the spring. So I was going to take my administrative leave in the fall of 2023 and then stay on in the spring of 2024 at a reduced pay, because I was like, I'm not going to do any administrative stuff or service stuff or teaching stuff. I'll just stay on to help these students get across the finish line, because they needed basically like another year to finish up. And I didn't want to just leave without having some plan in place to support them. But I also was not willing to support them for free, right? Like, I was not going to stay on committees without being compensated by the university to do that. And so basically what it came down to is they were trying to get me to stay on for free, which I wasn't willing to do. And so for me, that was also my ancestors being like, girl, we ain't say negotiate staying on for another year for grad students. We said it's time to go. So I was able to walk away because at the end of the day, again, they didn't agree to the terms that I set forth for being willing to stay on, even though, again, those terms were very time limited because I knew I needed to get out of there. So that's like some of what happened. So anyway, all of this to say, this book is really speaking to me in my version of how I experience some of these things and my version of my exit from academia. So she says, looking back, I see my heart wasn't in it and I should have left months before, but I was terrified to take the leap away from my identity as an educator into the uncharted waters of entrepreneurship. Education was my passion and what I'd known from my whole professional life. It was also my financial security. But we often stay on a path too long because our identity is tied to it. It's okay to change your mind, to pivot, and to want something different for yourself. I was evolving. So, and then she goes on to say she had saved enough money for several months of a financial cushion. So I do appreciate that, because I also did the same thing. I had enough money to be able to walk away and know that I could still pay my bills and things like that without the steady paycheck of the academy. And of course, I had also already launched Belle Vie Academy at that point. But I hear what she's saying, and I have an exit strategies course that I offer through Belle Vie Academy, and these are some of the things that I get into in terms of what can be challenging about walking away from from academia in particular, because again, that's the profession that I'm in. And so I appreciate her naming, because again, it's relate like this idea that education is your passion, is also part of your identity. So some of the things I get into in exit strategies are it's like 3 F's that I focus on. One is fear, right? And the fear is related to finances, material conditions, like how am I going to pay my bills without this steady paycheck from this institution? But then part of the fear is also existential and connected to identity and status and all of those things. So I appreciate her naming that. So it's fear, it's finances, and then it's also freedom, right? And so I'm like, okay, we need to talk about our fears related to the existential things like that. We need to talk about the finances and how to get things lined up to give yourself the cushion that you need in order to kind of get out there. And then also like imagine what freedom really looks like to you. I was actually talking to a friend of mine earlier today who's also a member of Belle Vie Academy and Belle Vie Writers, and I was saying I'm actually about to add 2 more classes to the exit strategy course suite. One is going to focus on converting your CV to a resume for academics, because I think a lot of times we've only thought in terms of CV and we've only thought about our skill sets in terms of what we can do within the academy, but we have these transferable skill sets. So I think being able to convert your CV to a resume can help you think more concretely and tangibly about what your transferable skill sets are, because we have very valuable skills as academics that can be transferred out of academia. And so I want to invite people to reflect on, in converting the CV to a resume, think about it, for me, because I'm an entrepreneur, think about it in terms of your transferable skills for entrepreneurship. But because I understand not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, you can also think about it as transferable skills for other work in the private sector or the public, or whatever sector you want to be in that's not academia, right? So that's one class that I'm going to add, is converting the CV to a resume. And then another class that I'm going to add is looking at personality assessment. So this is something that I first heard from Rachel Rogers that I did, and I also found very helpful. So I took a number of different personality assessments, like Strengths Finder. I'm not even remember the names of, but I took like 5 different personality assessment tests, because it helps you see where your strengths are and like what your skill sets are, and again how you might transfer that into whatever you want to do next, whether it's looking for a job if you want a job, or building a business if you want to do entrepreneurship. So anyway, so I'm excited about adding those classes to the Exit Strategies course suite. But again, I appreciate Hallmon naming here all of those different things that were coming up for her as she was transitioning from being an educator and then going full-time into entrepreneurship. Okay, so then she gives this other example of, so she says, she talks about being in this liminal space. And I also remember I literally have an essay that I never published, but it's like in my journal that I might put on Substack, called like, liminal spaces, that deals with this. So she says, I've come to understand that big feelings that go in all directions are not necessarily signs of misalignment, but rather the natural consequence of moving through a liminal space. Times when we are in transition from one place or role to another. But at the time, the big mix of emotions was scary. Was I making the right choice by following my passion, right? So she goes on to tell the story of like how the last day that she's going into work, she's basically like going to drop off all her stuff, and she decides to check her voicemail, and she gets a voicemail from someone she'd done some kind of workshop or like a leadership development workshop like the summer before. And the people that she'd done this leadership development workshop call her and leave her an email saying, "Hi, you did this workshop for us. We're interested in hiring you to do more workshops, and we just want to check and see if you can do work outside, if we can hire you to take on outside work, like outside of this role that she had for the Department of Education." And so she's like, basically, she now that she no longer worked for the Georgia Department of Education, she could indeed take on this outside work. And so she says, I did a 1-day monthly training for APS, which paid the equivalent of my entire monthly salary at the Georgia Department of Education. I love this story so much because I think it's such a great example of like the universe meeting you where you are and just catching you when you feel like you're falling, right? And so she took that step and took that leap, walking away from the Georgia Department of Education, and literally on her last day she gets this call about this opportunity that pays her as much for 1 day's work as she was getting in 1 month at the previous job. So my version of this is I submitted my letter of resignation on, I think, March 1st for June 30th, right? So I remember I was at King in Costa Rica, and as I was leaving Costa Rica to head back to the United States, I sent an email with my letter of resignation effective June 30th. And then maybe a week or two after that, I posted on social media, I'm leaving academia, I quit, I liberated myself, all of these things, guided by the ancestors to get out and get out now, right? I posted all that on social media. So a week or two after I posted that on social media, or I might have actually posted it more immediately, but it was a week or two after I made the announcement on social media that someone reaches out to me on social media and says, I saw that you're leaving academia. I'm putting together this program at this institute in Germany, and I had you in mind for this program. Let me know if you're still interested in it, even though you're leaving academia. So I said, okay, well, send me like the call in the description and let me see if it's aligned with like the work that I do, right? So again, alignment. So she sends me the description and it almost reads like exactly everything that I do with Black feminism, intersectionality, all of the things that I do. And so I went ahead and like sent a letter of interest for that position. I was offered the position. And so basically, like before I even got to my last day as a professor, I already had lined up an international fellowship in Germany for myself. So that fellowship could have been a full year. I decided not to go in the fall because I wanted to take my own sabbatical and really take some rest from like July to December of 2023, which I did for the most part. I still did some things, like I wrote some letters of recommendation. I was still like dealing with the copy edits and then the page proofs. Maybe the page proofs. I think I was, well, the copy edits or the page proofs, I don't remember. It's a blur now. But I was still dealing with some of the details for the Beauvoir and Belle Black Feminist Critique of the Second Sex book with Oxford University Press. And then I went to Germany in January of 2024. So again, I just love this story of like literally on her last day, she gets this voicemail about another opportunity that has already like manifested for her. So yes to that. Okay, let's see. Okay, then on page 50, she talks about what we've talked about already a little bit, the importance of knowing that your skills are transferable. So she says, when I honored the calling to run the village market full time, my spirit felt settled. It seemed as though my soul exhaled. I heard the whisper of purpose affirming that I was doing the work I was sent here to do. I moved back into alignment. And although I had left education as a career, the gifts and skills that were so fundamental to my teaching, relationship building, knowledge sharing, empathy, a reverence for learning, a need to nurture, were not lost. They were repurposed in my new community into the village market. So I really want to encourage, again, most of my audience is academics, although people also watch my videos who are not academics. So shout out to the people who aren't academics, who are still part of my beloved community, because the stories also relate to other industries. I'm also finding that, like, I've attended conferences like, hey, I'm recording. I've also found connections like attending conferences like Afrotech, or even doing like the NABHOOD, the National Association for Black Hotel Owners, Operators, and Developers, and the Hospitality Hue conference that I've described. A lot of experiences, especially for Black women in the Academy, Black women philosophers in particular, but Black women in the Academy more generally, and then Black women in these other industries. There's a lot of overlaps between those things. So I say that to say I tend to talk about academia because that's the career that I came out of. But there's definitely correlations with other industries and other professions, or even looking at, again, Dr. Lakesha Hallmon talking about being in like K through 12 education and then working for the Georgia Department of Education. There's some overlap between her story and my story in higher education, right? So it's like take what you need, what resonates, and leave the rest. But the main point I wanted to make here was that, again, the skills that you have, that you've developed over all of these years, they're not lost. They don't disappear. They're not going to waste. They get transferred and repurposed for whatever your next sense of purpose may be. Okay, let's see. Okay, I just have two more tabs that I want to get to here before I wrap it up. Okay, so this is on page 57. Oh, this is what she talks about. I mentioned this a little bit in the interview because she talks about it in an interview, but the need to really take some time to get quiet and have some solitude so that you can really connect to your sense of purpose, so that you can connect to what feels aligned for you, because it can be hard to know what's aligned or misaligned when you are just constantly, exhausted and tired, although that may also be a sign of misalignment, right? But she says, it's important to begin to create a safe space for ourselves within ourselves. She says we can hear the downloads that connect us to our purpose. We understand how we can add good to the world. While our purpose finds its expression and fulfillment in community, we cannot show up as our best for others if we are not tending to ourselves first. The quiet moments that precede the togetherness, the solitary reflection that happens in between the wonderful communion with others, is essential for alignment, right? So solitude and quiet time is essential for alignment. We are more than one thing and meant to do many incredible things over our lives. So a few things there. I personally love solitude. Some of my life choices don't align with that. Like, I have 4 children, right? Which means that, I'm mothering a lot of the time. So I have to be really intentional about carving out time for solitude, carving out time for quiet. But I love solitude. I love quiet. I've done several silent retreats, whether it was like, self-led quiet silent retreats, or at Jesuit centers or yoga centers, or whatever the case may be. So I approve this message a lot. I think it is important to have solitude, to get quiet, to connect to yourself. I've taken solo trips that I've read about on Substack, for example. So I love this message of the importance of like connecting to ourselves before connecting to others. And I love this message that we are more than one thing and meant to do many incredible things. That actually made me think about this clip with Stacey Abrams, where she's talking on the Reliving Single podcast. And she says, we contain multitudes. So she talks about herself being a tax attorney and a romance novelist, for example, right? And so like we contain a lot of things within ourselves, and it's okay to give ourselves permission to explore all of those parts of ourselves authentically. And a lot of times it also requires us having some solitude and some time for reflection and connection to explore like how and when we want to do those things, or express those things. Okay, this is the last quote. Oh, and actually I'm not quoting here. This is the last point that I'm going to make. This is the end of chapter 2. So at the end of chapter 2, and I think the other chapters have this as well, she offers some reflection questions. I love some good reflection questions when I do my course suites in Belle Vie Academy course suites and community. There are a lot of reflection questions there as well. And so I'll just read the first one, but you should look at just buy the book and read the book for sure. But I'll read the first question, but there are several. But again, this is something that reminds me of some of the questions that I have in my course suite. So she says, which parts of your life feel energizing and which feel depleting? When you consider your purpose and business plan, how can you use those energizing elements to help guide you, right? And so again, literally in my High Achievers course suite, there is a class within that course suite where I provide, I look at different areas of life and different areas of work and give people an opportunity to reflect on, is this energizing or is this depleting or is this something that's neutral? So like with academics, it's like when you look at your teaching, which aspects of that, is that energizing or is it depleting? When you look at your research, is it energizing or depleting or neutral? When you look at your service, is it energizing, depleting, or neutral? And then also things like on the home front. So all of that to say, I feel like this is my new bestie, right? Like, I'm enjoying this book. I'm 2 chapters in. I'm enjoying it. The second chapter on alignment especially resonated with me. So I appreciate it. So, I would love to hear from you guys. What is resonating with you that I have shared from the book so far? Do you already have the book? Are you reading it? What are some of your thoughts about it? If you don't have the book, please get it and let me know that you got it, and holler at me in the comments as I continue to go through it. I think I am going to try to do one for every 2 chapters. So in that case, it would be a 4-part series, but let's just get through the first part first with the first 2 chapters. And then let me know just where you are with regard to, like, are you feeling in alignment at this stage and phase in your life? Are you feeling misaligned at this stage and phase in your life? If you're feeling misaligned, what would help you shift from that misalignment and get back into alignment? If you're feeling aligned, what was necessary for you to do in your life to get to that place of alignment or return to that place of alignment? So yeah, put it in the comments. I do read and respond to the comments. And again, if you're not already subscribed, subscribe. If you know somebody that you think this would resonate with, please share it with them. And what to watch next, I would say, again, I'm going to do some more in this series on this book, so that may be up next, but I have some other things related to other things that I'm doing as well. So you can look out for the next part 2 of this series. Reviewing No One is Self-Made, but I've also been posting things related to my Philosopher to Hotelier journey, and I'm very excited because I'm actually about to do a new series on academics more generally, but Black women philosophers more particularly. So the first person that I've interviewed for that is a woman named Dr. Lena Buffington. I am going to post her. I've scheduled her episode to be posted on September 1st. I just re-listened to it and it's so good. She dropped so many gems that actually very much relate to what we're talking about here in terms of alignment and misalignment and pursuing our passions and us being many different things, right? And so she's somebody who we both went to Spelman together. I went to the University of Memphis for grad school. She went to Emory for grad school. I did the trajectory of, tenure track jobs and all of that. She intentionally opted out of that path, so she did not go the tenure track job route. She worked in the academy a little bit. She worked with nonprofits for a little bit. She worked in philanthropy for a little bit. So she has some different paths that she took over time. And she's doing something that she really loves, like that she wanted to do as a child, that she revisited as an adult. So it's a beautiful first episode of that series. So I'm really excited about that. So that is also something to look out for after this one that I think does overlap with this in interesting ways. So that one, again, with Lena Buffington, will be posted on September 1st on the channel. So so you can subscribe and maybe turn on the notifications if you want to see when that episode drops. But I am definitely also going to continue to do some more on these chapters as I continue to read them. Okay, thanks for staying with me. I'm enjoying this. I'm, like, as I said, I am exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I need to be doing, and I really appreciate those of you who are with me on this journey, who are part of my beloved community in real life as well as virtually, as well as like in the comments. Shout out to Belle Vie Academy and Belle Vie Writers. Y'all know I love y'all. Okay, bye.